So none of you know what almost happened, do you? Like, it's clear walking around that almost none of you know what kind of world we were almost living in. And the fact that many of you think that I'm being especially vague or cryptic right now proves what I'm talking about. So in light of recent events, I'm going to take us back in time, back to the summer of 2024. That's when a gunman, for reasons that are still totally unknown, came within millimeters of killing Donald Trump. And when I try to tell people, do you know what almost happened there? What they say is baffling to me because they'll be like, yeah, probably would have been President J.D. Vance. Who can say how different his agenda might have been, or maybe the election would have went the other way. And it's like, are you crazy? My last video was about 9/11, about how fundamentally it changed the country and the culture. Okay, if that bullet had been a couple of inches the other direction, the change would have been many, many, many times more profound than 9/11. And if you think I'm exaggerating or being overdramatic, that's fine. Feel free to explain in the comments. I think you are badly, badly out of touch with the culture. This would not just be the assassination of a president, somebody who was former president at the time, about to become president again. That itself is, of course, exceptionally rare. It's not just that this would be the first assassination to be broadcast live in high definition from dozens of different angles. Remember, the film of Kennedy getting shot, that was not released to the public until years later. People only heard about that secondhand. They did not see it. But you have to understand, on top of all that, what a unique figure Donald Trump is. In the United States, there's a solid, I'm going to say, 20 to 25% of voters who see Donald Trump as a holy figure. They literally believe he has been anointed by God to heal America and bring it back to righteousness. And then beyond that hardcore 20 to 25%, there's another, I don't know, 10 to 15% who do not see him as a holy figure, but do see him as a savior of the country. That is, he is the one who's going to save the country from the left, who is going to destroy it. If you're somebody who hates Donald Trump, I can't give you an equivalent figure on the left that would have this kind of effect. I can't say, well, imagine if Bernie Sanders were killed on high definition video. Because one, Bernie was never president and was never about to be president, but also you don't see him as a holy figure. There's people on the left who like him a lot, but nobody thinks of him the way many people on the right think of Donald Trump. And with that in mind, I want you to think back to the summer of 2024, year leading up to the election. I want you to imagine those supporters watching this happen in a high definition, seeing this video plastered all over every screen, nonstop, for days, of their savior's skull being shattered. And then, in the hours and days after that, seeing the wave of jubilation and celebration from the other side. This 35 to 40% of the country that are rock solid, pretty hardcore Trump supporters, which represents, I don't know, 100 million people, seeing social media flooded with celebration, seeing how 100% of the trending topics on Twitter and all of the Twitter clones are people saying, yes, it's over, thank God. Seeing people celebrating in the streets, which is a thing I think 100% would happen. I mean, I saw this after bin Laden got killed in New York. You saw people take to the streets. It was just such a catharsis. It was such relief. And I think video of those celebrations would be spammed across the screens of all of these supporters day and night from Fox News and every single right of center pundit out there. As I'm recording this is just after the killing of a pundit and right-wing activist named Charlie Kirk, a man whom most people had never heard of, but we just saw a memorial for him that was attended by hundreds of thousands of people. And we saw a huge crackdown from this government to specifically go after any public figure who expressed any kind of happiness or satisfaction or glee over the man's killing, demanding that people lose their jobs, that they be deplatformed, that their TV shows be canceled, that their FCC license be pulled from their network. And this reaction that we've seen that has rippled through the whole culture is one spark in the nuclear bomb that would have gone off had that assassin's bullet hit home for Donald Trump in July of 2024. Imagine if I got into a time machine and went back in time to before the 9/11 attacks and I thwarted the attack somehow. The way I feel right now is the way I would feel if after I had done that, if I hung around in that world through September, October, November of 2001 and went to people and said, hey, do you remember that story in the news on how those guys got arrested because they were planning to hijack a bunch of planes and like crash them into office buildings? Do you remember that? And people saying, yeah, I think I remember hearing something about that. And me trying to explain, well, you know, if they had pulled off that attack, millions of people would have died. Like not in the attack, but in the aftermath, there would be basically a third world war that spans multiple countries. And domestically in the United States, there would be all sorts of fundamental changes in how we live our lives and how we fly and how much intrusion we allow from the federal government. The type of movies and TV shows we make would totally change. Just the nature of the culture would change. And I imagine all of the people walking around saying, yeah, sounds pretty bad, but you know, it didn't happen. Those guys get arrested. That's how I feel walking around when I try to tell people this, and they're like, well, yeah, but the bullet missed. I'm not saying the country would have descended into civil war. I don't even know how that would work. There's not distinct regions that could go to war with one another. But the demand for some kind of a crackdown or some kind of reciprocal act from the other side would have been huge. Just the amount of discord in the culture where you have family members mourning this man being killed and then watching other members of their family celebrating the death online. And having every social media space where right-wing figures hang out being taunted with clips and gifs of the president's head rupturing. I don't think it would be a literal civil war like the kind of thing we're used to, but it would have been something. And that something would have been terrible. Which brings me to the subject of today's video, which is you do not want a new civil war. No matter what part of the political spectrum you're on, you do not want a new civil war. Now, many of you who are normal are saying, Jason, who are you even arguing with? Obviously, nobody wants a new civil war. But if you go on social media, particularly Twitter and its clones and also Reddit, the calls for a new civil war from all sides is ubiquitous. Like there are social media bubbles out there where if you say you don't think we should have a new civil war, you will be shouted down as a coward. Like in those spaces, the people saying that voting won't accomplish anything, we need to take to the streets with violence, that is not just the majority opinion, it's the only accepted opinion. And if you're saying, well, yeah, these are just a bunch of extremely online, mentally maladjusted weirdos, I agree. But what we have seen in the Twitter era of the last, 15 years, is that what starts there permeates out into the culture. So this kind of civil war ideation that you see online comes in a few flavors. The rarest is probably the people who specifically use the term Civil War or Civil War II. But those people do exist. There are groups on the right that have entire memes that they share that specifically about when the second war comes. But a little more common than that are the people who say things like voting won't fix this, insisting that all of these channels that you're supposed to go through, this is just the status quo keeping you imprisoned. But then if you try to pin them down and say, okay, do you actually want a new war? And what would that war look like? And what would the goals of that war be? And who do you think the parties fighting would be? And what would you consider to be acceptable casualties in such a conflict? They will immediately back off and just do the thing that a lot of people do online, where they will just start being sarcastic and making snarky comments, implying that if you're asking for people to go out and raise money or volunteer or knock on doors or lobby for change, that these people are just being spineless because they all know that that's not how real change will occur. And to be absolutely clear, these people are not talking about protesting. Protesting can be extremely effective, especially if it demonstrates that you've got a lot of organization behind you and money and popular support. These are the people that if they see a peaceful protest will say that peaceful protesting doesn't do anything. That if these people who took to the streets, if they really wanted change, they would be setting things on fire. And then a little more common than that are all of the people who simply say, well, there's no debating these issues. Or they'll say something like, there's no persuading these people, the left or the right. We have to crush them instead. We have to destroy them. But if you try to pin them down and say, okay, do you mean figuratively destroy them? Like destroy them in an election? Like, wow, we got so many more votes, we destroyed their candidate. They will seem to imply no, because their whole thing is, well, we're not debating these issues. We're not persuading anybody. But obviously in a democracy, you do have to do that. Like, it's true that the hardcore radicals are not going to be persuaded by a debate, but that's not who you're trying to persuade. Most people are not radicals. So again, you have people who just are very vague and make oblique references to the polite way of resolving these issues isn't going to work. Do you see the pattern here? It's like a series of concentric circles where at the center you have people explicitly saying, yes, we need a civil war II. And then outside of that, people who are a little bit more vague about it, but there's more of them. And then outside of that, there's people who are even more common, but their language is even more vague. And on the outer ring are all of those who will never use any kind of language about violence or killing or destroying, but they will describe their opponents in language that is dehumanizing and implies that the only way to stop them would be to kill them. Because if they are the thing you're describing them as, then of course violence would be the only answer. When I was growing up, I went to a pretty hardcore Pentecostal church, and I never once heard a pastor say, hey, we should be killing abortion doctors or burning down abortion clinics. But they constantly referred to abortion as a type of Holocaust. And they threw around numbers. I think at the time they said there had been 30 million aborted fetuses. And well, that's 5 times the Holocaust. And it was so weird because if somebody had stood up in the congregation and said, hey, I've brought some dynamite, let's go blow up the abortion clinic, everybody in that congregation would have said, sit down, what are you talking about? But if they actually agreed with what the pastor was saying, if they agreed that the situation we're in is literally identical to being in the European theater during World War II, that if we literally do think that these abortion doctors are like Nazi death camp guards and commanders, then yeah, what are we doing sitting around talking about it? We should be blowing up that building. And that's the way this last group operates, and it's extremely common, where you will just casually put your opponents in a category where if they actually were in that category, then yeah, we would be going to war with them, but without following the idea to that next logical conclusion. Or you may see these people simply use eliminationist language, saying that these people, our opponents, we can't simply beat them or defeat them or reform them or change their minds. We have to get rid of them. We have to purge them from the culture. And again, if you ask, well, what do you mean? Do you mean they should be imprisoned? Do you mean they should be forced to leave the country? Like, as a practical issue, if you were in charge, if you had all of the law enforcement branches under your command, what do you think should happen to the most hardcore Trump supporters or the most hardcore people on the left who you think are stirring up violence? What would you like to see happen to them? And do you actually mean it? Like, if I brought these people into a room with you right now and gave you a weapon, would you take some kind of action? Or is it just the way we talk on the internet, where we will describe other human beings we see on our screens the way we will talk about like video game enemies that, you know, you click on them and there's a little animation and they just disappear and now they're gone from the game. And what all of these people do, regardless of how explicit they are in their language, when they see one of their opponents or perceived opponents has been killed or almost killed, they will cheer it on or they will joke about it. And I think of the people saying things like that, I think not 1 in 10,000 of them actually mean it. By that I mean, if they were there on the scene when, let's say, a health insurance CEO gets out of his car, and if they saw a guy approaching with a gun, they would try to warn the victim, or they would even call the police over. Or if they were especially brave, they would physically intervene. What they would not do is stand there and say, yes, comrade, get him, go strike a blow for the revolution. It's just a thing they say on the internet. I know this because not 1 in 100,000 of them will actually go out and do any kind of violence. And if they do, that violence will come in the form of them vandalizing a statue or something. So when I explain why you do not want a second civil war, I'm talking to two distinct groups. There's the people who actually do think they want that, and there's all of the other people who just like to use that language, who just like to sit around and daydream about it for some reason. So first, for the people who explicitly say we do have to have another civil war in order to advance the country to where it needs to go. First of all, some people out there are already very upset that I seem to be both sidesing this issue. I will say it right now, the entire time Barack Obama was in office, you could go to right-wing message boards like Free Republic and see them talking 24 hours a day about the new civil war that they were going to have to conduct in order to overthrow the socialists. They posted photos of the ammunition they stockpiled. When Bill Clinton was in office in the 90s, right-wing militias went and trained in the woods, and anti-government extremists blew up a federal building in Oklahoma City. Back then, you did not have to go into the dark web to find people discussing Civil War II. You could find talk radio hosts talking about it openly. And right now, Donald Trump is president. So yes, in leftist spaces, you see plenty of talk of this guy literally is not going to leave office. We are going to have to overthrow his government. And right now, probably in the comments of this very video is somebody saying, hey, we are already at war. If you think about it, people are already dying from climate change. A revolution would just be fighting back. I mean, it's not like things could be worse than they are now. To which I will reply, you're crazy and you have no concept of how anything in the world actually works. What do you even think such a war would look like? A war to try to overthrow not just Trump, but Trumpism. So I guess not just a war with that administration, but with all of the state level administrations that are aligned with him. Like, aren't you also at war with Ron DeSantis? With the governments in Florida and Texas and who knows how many other states? And with what? Because you're going to be taking on the U.S. military. They're not going to be on your side. So what are you imagining? Where are your arms coming from? Where's the funding coming from? Are you picturing a foreign government sending you military aid? Or are you just picturing yourself doing a bunch of like terrorist attacks, blowing up pipelines and oil refineries and banks, I guess? Because of course that would just trigger a massive crackdown from the federal government and all of the various law enforcement agencies, all of whom will be on the other side. None of what you're describing is going to rally popular support for your cause. Blowing up pipelines or refineries and making the price of gas go up is just going to make the public in general, one, hate you more, and also vote for whatever politicians promise to crack down the hardest on the stuff you're doing. But there is no amount of it that results in the thing you say you want. Like the thing you're talking about, or at least that you strongly imply you're talking about, where you successfully overthrow the system and install a new government, that would require an organization with trillions of dollars of funding behind it, trillions with a T, because that's how much money the people you're fighting have. But in far leftist spaces, they don't even talk about that. They talk about overthrowing worldwide capitalism. So not just overthrowing the American government, but also overthrowing the governments of Japan and every country in Europe. And then somehow also overthrowing all of the corporations and seizing the factories for the people. That would require an army of hundreds of millions of soldiers. And the other side would probably fight back with nukes. So what you're talking about is literally triggering the total collapse of civilization and hoping that from the ashes arises a utopia, rather than what would actually happen, which is a bunch of warlords rise up and use violence to impose feudalism and slavery. It is kids who have had their brains poisoned by Hollywood because in a Hollywood movie, the revolution always succeeds. The side that is more pure of heart always somehow wins. The Death Star always has a convenient little thing you can shoot into that will blow the whole thing up. And part of the fantasy is that everybody out there secretly agrees with them. That in the United States, there's 250 million secret communists who are just waiting to be given permission to overthrow the system. And they believe that because online they only talk to other communists, so they think that their views are popular. And roughly none of them are actually stockpiling ammunition and canned goods or training. They're not recruiting or doing any of the stuff you would actually do if you actually thought you were leading a revolution. And in fact, on their posts where they talk about how we need Civil War II to dethrone Trump, 5 minutes later, they will talk about how their anxiety would not let them go to the door to speak face to face with the DoorDash driver. This is a fantasy. It is a coping mechanism. It is just something they say. It is a way to express the frustration and fear they feel every single day. It is a way to try to transfer that fear to the other side, to try to make the other guys feel the same fear that you do, to try to get back at them by imposing a negative emotion on them. You see how upset they get when you go on and celebrate when one of theirs gets killed, and that's fun because, well, I'm also upset. Now I've made you upset. I have somehow struck a blow in the war against the right. Now, for the rest of you who do not explicitly call for a new civil war, but just continually hint that violence is the only way, I fully realize that this is just trash talk. It's just something we say on the internet. I fully realize that every time the violence does spill over into the real world, that the gunman is usually very mentally ill or otherwise disturbed. The guy who tried to shoot Trump, to this day, we don't even know his politics. It appeared he was just unstable or wanted to make a name for himself. And if so, you're saying, well, then why do you care? Why would you make an entire YouTube video yelling at people rather than yelling at the power structures that are actually causing us to be this frustrated that we would say things like this? It is because I believe that the revolution LARPers, the people who do basically live action role play as revolutionaries, I believe they are the best friend the status quo ever had. For two reasons. One, every time somebody comes in and talks about doing something that actually would affect change, like voting or volunteering or donating or mobilizing a real effective protest or boycott, all of these things can make differences and do make differences in the real world. The revolution LARPers come into their comments and call them cowards and say, no, nothing will change until we have the war to overthrow capitalism. There is no point in doing any of the stuff you're doing. And they will say that, and then they will stay planted on their sofa, continually scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, occasionally pausing to say, well, no need for me to get off my sofa until the day the revolution comes, specifically because they know that day will never come. The next election will come. The next opportunity to volunteer for your candidate or donate to your candidate or participate in some kind of a boycott, that will happen. So to say, I'm not going to do any of that boring stuff because I'm going to save myself for the day when the great revolution occurs is just another way of saying, I'm not going to do anything. The system is not afraid of you. The system loves it when you sit around on social media and talk about revolution. You are the perfect tool of the system because on top of the fact that they know you're not going to do anything, they then can point to your language that you're using and call you violent and dismiss all of your other positions and say, see, the left doesn't actually care about climate change. They just want to kill people. The left, they say, doesn't actually care about social justice or helping any of these marginalized groups. They just want violence. So, they say, when you hear someone advocating for these causes, remember, look at their social media and see what they actually want, because what they actually want is blood in the streets. They don't want reform to the healthcare system like they say. They want to see people be shot and killed on a sidewalk without any kind of a trial or anything. They just want all of their enemies to be shot dead in the street. Look at their comments. Look at their social media traffic talking about Luigi. Don't vote for the murder. Don't vote for the reform. They love equating those two things. They love equating environmentalists with people who block traffic. See, I'm going to let you in on a secret. This is the thing that the people in power do not want you to know, which is that between you and change is a huge, tall wall called boredom. Everything you can plausibly do to actually affect change in the real world is boring. It takes long, tedious effort. It looks like a whole lot of people getting educated to get law degrees and then running for city council or becoming attorneys and then becoming judges. And apply that to everything, every pillar of power in society. Whether you're talking about corporate boardrooms or lobbyists, you want your own people in there, but that means having a pipeline of your own people who have actually learned how to do those things, people who are hyper competent and educated and talented and driven, people who want real change. Change that takes time, because guess what? That's what the other side has. And when the LARPers say that real change doesn't occur that way, they're basing that entirely on fantasy in Hollywood. Do you want a superpower, the kind that will change the world? Learn to tolerate boredom. Learn to apply yourself to a subject and tolerate people slamming doors in your faces and to keep at it for years. The real world operates kind of the opposite of how the Matrix did, where the Matrix was saying that this cubicle in this office is part of a soothing lie. It's an illusion that has been sold to you. Where real change means doing zero gravity kung fu and stunts and fighting robots with lasers. Here in the real world, it's the exact opposite of that. The idea that the only way change happens is with some sort of a cool action scene with you blowing up a building, that is the fantasy that keeps you ineffective. That's the fantasy that keeps you out of the halls of power. The real work that actually saves lives is stuff that would be done in an office. And this brings me to the final defense of all of this that people always put forth, which is, well, the other side is doing it too. Because they're being violent in their language, including how their leaders talk, then we have to do it in response. But that's how we got here. So I think the response to that kind of talk coming from a leader should be, hey, you sound like a crazy person right now. I want leaders who don't talk like this. And the response to a common rank and file person saying it online should be, I don't think you're a violent person. I think you're just saying this because it's fun to say. Because it's fun to daydream of a world where every problem can be solved with some sort of spectacular act of blowing up a thing or killing a villain. Because that's the way it works in an action movie. That no, you do not actually think that the situation we're in right now is exactly identical to World War II, where we are fighting the Nazis in a war zone with uniformed soldiers. You don't want that to be the case. That war killed 50 million people. And in the 80 years since, the killing power of the weapons used by militaries has gone up exponentially. With all of that said, I'm making this video for a reason, which is that in the wake of the Charlie Kirk thing, I got multiple media requests from people who wanted to do interviews with me or just wanted me to issue some kind of a statement about the incident. The reason for this is the book that I wrote. I wrote a novel called I'm Starting to Worry About This Black Box of Doom, but it was not a book about assassinating Charlie Kirk. That would be crazy. But it is a story that takes place over a backdrop of this kind of Civil War ideation and about how social media algorithms kind of bubble that type of talk to the top and makes it much more visible and makes it seem like it's much more common than it actually is. I've turned down all of those because I do not want to present myself as an expert, because I'm not. Again, this is a novel. It's a piece of fiction. But I also don't want to come off like I'm trying to sell my book off of the back of this terrible event. But at the same time, it is a book explicitly about turning down the temperature, about the fact that you create an environment that inevitably is going to spit out extremists who are going to take things into the real world. So if you are interested in that subject or find anything I say compelling, go to the library and get a copy for free. I will not get any money for that. I'm trying to find a way to say that the book is relevant, but I'm not here pleading for your money. Borrow a copy of the book from your friend. Get it from a used bookstore. Don't steal it. That's a crime. I'm not telling you not to buy it. I'm just saying that that's not why I'm here. The royalties I earn from the book that you buy, I'm not going to donate it to a good cause. I'm going to spend the money on something stupid. I will tack on the trailer we made for the book to the end of this video. But again, this is not me promoting my business. If you can find the book for free or at a steep discount, do it. Thank you, and may cooler heads prevail. One day, a woman you've never met before offers you $100,000 cash to drive her across the country. Half now, half when you arrive, 2,600 miles. But there's a catch. She has with her a large, locked black box, big enough that you could crawl inside of it. She says you're not allowed to look inside the box, and in fact, you're not even allowed to ask any questions about the box. She says you have to leave behind any devices that can be tracked. No phone, no laptop, no credit cards, no GPS navigation. You'll be paying with cash and navigating with a paper map the whole way. And finally, she says you cannot tell anyone where you're going, and no, you cannot have time to think about it. We leave now. You hesitate. She doubles the offer. Would you do it? Maybe, if you're brave enough or desperate enough. And besides, you think, what's the worst that can happen?